everybody. Hey, thanks for coming out tonight. Thanks for sharing your Otakon with us. You got a great con. Everything's going well. We are members of the True Anime community, which initially formed on Reddit and then moved over to a Discord. And we wanted to get a little more out of our hobby of watching anime than we were able to get through the discussions we were having on our anime. So, by way of introduction, on my left, I have our moderator, Church Neo, the current world record holder in Shadow of the Colossus. It's true. On our right, Administrator Kura. Hello, thank you. And my name is Kai, or Clear and Sweet. So, we're not experts, guys. If you have some background in, textual criticism or anything like that, you may have some different ideas, and that's fine. It's kind of a panel to get people into textual criticism, going from the 101, from the basics. So, why bother? Why are you even here? Why are you sitting in these cool chairs? If you were like we are, then you've been told in your life, or you've seen something and you've commented on it, and you've been told, oh, you're overthinking that. Why can't you turn your brain off and just enjoy it? Or like, oh yeah, but I enjoyed it, so your criticism of it is not valid. And why do you have to ruin it for me? That's the real rough one. Like, opening their minds would somehow make it worse for them. So that's kind of the impetus for this panel. I wanted anybody who's in that position, or really stuck there, to know that not only can you make this a hobby and make this interesting and get something out of this for other people and the community that it generates, but also for yourself and learn a little bit about yourself. And on the other side of the coin, something I've encountered before from people well-versed in the academic world, is that it's some kind of mystical spell, or like you need to have been this read in order to analyze a text critically. You have to read Barthes, you have to, understand all these highfalutin ideas. And I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. Having more background in anything will open up more doors to you and make it easier to figure things out. But anyone can do this. And if you want to make it a hobby, we're here to point you in the right direction so you get some enjoyment out of it. So maybe you're starting from zero. I went on Reddit and I searched SAO sucks, and this is one of the results that came up. So Kura, if you would, please.
Okay, I am sick and tired of hearing people say SAO sucks or SAO is a terrible anime. Okay, I freaking get it. I know it isn't the best, and there are better anime like Dragon Ball Z or Yu Yu Hakusho or Kill la Kill, etc. But dang it, I watched SAO knowing it was about games, and me being a gamer, I was curious, and now I've seen it, and I admit it wasn't the best, but sometimes it's not the show, it's the other things like emotion.
I don't understand that.
And yeah, man, my heart goes out to this guy, right? Because on some way, he's not getting his point across, clearly. But in the same way, he's taken this negative criticism, and he's trying to combat that by explaining some aspect of the show that actually wasn't affected by whatever negative criticism they brought, that still rang true in spite of the negative criticism. And, his feelings aren't false. He did enjoy it, but he's reasoning then that the show must have done something effective enough to make him feel that way. And he's reasoning that correctly, right? But he doesn't have the faculties or the direction to kind of put that into words and turn it into something that he can use to really figure out why he liked it. And the reason my heart goes out to this guy is because I was the exact same person. I was 11 years old when I watched Sailor Moon for the first time on Toonami after school, and maybe some of you did as well. The R movie, everything like that. I forgot about anime for the next 11 years, and when I was a senior in college, I went back and rewatched Sailor Moon, knowing everything that I knew then as an adult. And I couldn't figure out why it made me feel exactly the same, or why it held up in the way that it did when I was an adult, as it did when I was 11 years old. And at the time, I didn't have the tools that I needed to really get to what it exactly was about the show that appealed to me more than nostalgia. Other stuff like the Power Rangers. Nobody is excited about the Power Rangers. So what was it about Sailor Moon? Like the Sword Art Online guy, my feelings were real and grounded in something, but I didn't have the context or the knowledge to figure out what exactly it was. And that's kind of the first hurdle here, is that you or me there, that's courtesy of zero punctuation, that's me. You react to something, you see something, you consume it, and you're this big bundle of triggers and everything that's led you to be who you are today, your past, your genetics, your culture, everything about you is so unique and individual. And then you come across this text, whatever it is, and it's everything from, Evangelion down to Tola Vru, and it makes you feel some kind of way. And that's individualized based on what the text showed and what was there. And your first instinct, and how we want to go about learning textual criticism, or one way that we can go about learning textual criticism, is to base it off our feelings. As my favorite critic, film crit Hulk, once said, media emotionally manipulates you. It's what it does. So you don't try and fight it, go along with the ride. But here's the thing in what forms criticism. Usually you're not alone. While you're individualized, your feelings are probably shared by somebody else. And usually, it's pretty clear what feelings are trying to be elicited by the show. So for Sword Art Online, in the words of a Sword Art Online fan, that it's a power couple. It does a great job of making the epic moments feel epic, and the tender ones feel real tender. So maybe this guy came across like negative criticism saying the writing's bad, or it's tropey, or, any number of things that were wrong with the show, scare quotes. But that doesn't matter to him, because of his feelings. Or maybe the anime makes you feel at peace, safe, and content. And we see people that watch Ari all the time and say, oh, I loved it, it was so good, it made me feel warm and fuzzy, and I cried a bit. Great. That's the point, right? Or maybe it isn't. Maybe the show wants to make you feel uncanny, uncomfortable, and awkward. And I love seeing people's reactions to Flower of Evil because of the rotoscoping and everything. It doesn't look like anything in anime. And what's more is how do people react to unsettling emotions? Because art doesn't have to be pure pleasure-based, right? In fact, art can make you repulsive, angry, or disgusted. And then you see people, you see their first reaction, they'll say, School Days is a terrible show. I hate it. Like, no, School Days is actually a very well-made show. It's got great directing, writing, dialogue. It sells a real tone. And that's kind of the first encounter, anime being this pleasurable medium, generally, of the separation between good and like. And this is a famous cartoon from the New Yorker. On the internet, no one knows you're a dog. That's what's written under there. And that's kind of my problem with how we engage in textual criticism in today's day and age, is that it's all on the internet, right? And you'll make a post on some website and something, and then somebody will read it who has no idea who you are or your experiences or anything like that. And it's so vague, and they'll see, well, I really liked, whatever, Sword Art Online. And they'll think, God, I don't know anything about that person, so I can't really say what it was that they liked about it, and they're not offering anything. Since we don't have any way to directly beam our thoughts and emotions into other brains, and you can avoid this by talking with people that know you, generally. It won't be 100%, but you'll still get a better picture than a random person on the internet, or following somebody on like Giger or Digibro. We have a small online community, so we generally know each other's personalities and know what we're going to like and why we like it. But that takes time. So in lieu of that, what we have to do, and what you'll have to do if you want to engage in textual criticism, is pry like I'm a middle school English teacher. And we're reading Macbeth. I don't know, you read Macbeth in high school. So you're a high school English teacher, and they say, what did Macbeth make you feel? And just poke, 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 poke. And the more you get people to explain, the more you kind of peel away that onion, or peel away that distance between people. And you get a better understanding of what the person sees and how they felt and why they felt that way. So instead of talking about it, what we're going to do is we're going to have a little experiment. This here, I have a clip from one of my favorite movies of all time, The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya. I've seen the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya multiple times. Church has not, ever. So we're going to watch a 1-minute clip of the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, and we're going to see what Church feels about it, and why, and then prod him a little further. Oh, shit. There it is.
Usually on the left, bottom left. It's not due. Shut up.
Oh yeah, no spoilers for this, like Haruhi Suzumiya just disappeared, it's in the title. You know Haruhi, right?
No, I've never heard of her.
That's Haruhi Suzumiya's seat, isn't it? No, it's not. This Asakura sits there. Why is everyone staring? Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
I can take you to see the nurse. Maybe you have a fever or something.
Haruhi's gone. Nobody remembers her. Is that possible? Wasn't the deal supposed to be that the world revolved around her? Wasn't she the one the universe was interested in? Wasn't it watching? Nagato. Nagato.
You know Haruhi! You... It's all over the place, you can't control it.
You get a lot of money in the swear jar.
So Church, what did that make you feel?
Well, I would have to say that there was something that definitely felt like it was supposed to make you feel like nervous or rushed or panicked in a sense. So I guess that would probably be what I would say.
All right, cool. So, in pure Socratic fashion, why? What exactly was it about the show or that little clip that made you feel that way?
I did notice, well, obviously, like first and foremost, the script. It seemed like it was clearly focused on the disappearance. So that would make me feel that way. And then,
Was there anything about like the shots or what you saw?
yeah, it looked like there was like a lot of blurry cam, which is something that like you see in a lot of like media when things are supposed to be like that. The lighting was like really dark, and I noticed also like the blaringly like loud horns that were going on during like the soundtrack. So that's like another thing that kind of made me feel that way.
Great. And that's like step number 1 of textual criticism, of having your feelings, your reactions, and then going a step further. This is what we call deconstruction. And I don't want to drop too many words on you, and it's not a panel where you have to know too many words. But really what this is going through and picking out different elements that elicit a certain emotion. And of course, it's still personal. It's not going to extend to everyone. Not everyone may feel panicked in that clip of Haruhi, but the majority will, and that's kind of why the directors would use those techniques in order to make you feel panicked. So why bother any of this, right? Aside from if you want to make anime or movies or things, these are certainly techniques that you would want to use and analyze, but why bother even saying any of this or going through all of this? Can't you just stop at, oh, of course it made me feel panicked, duh. Well, this tells you something about yourself. So, have you guys seen Gurren Lagann? Did you guys like Gurren Lagann? I don't. I really don't. No, I don't. Yeah, I don't think it's bad. I don't. I talked to one of the people on our server, an old friend, and his favorite anime of all time is Gurren Lagann. I've met many people where that was the case. And yeah, we went back and forth on life philosophy, what all this stuff means, breaking down everything in the show. And it's really, at its core, Gurren Lagann is this internal struggle not to be limited by anything, to push forward, that your power is granted from inside and there's nobody who can tell you otherwise. And all you need to be is self-actualized to enact it. And that's the same thing that he arrived at. He said exactly that's what it's about. Well, that's exactly the reason it's his favorite series of all time, and exactly the reason I've never rewatched it and don't care about it. And he said the same thing about my favorite series of all time, Madoka Magica, where, it's from external, it's the power, the triumph of grace, of compassion and understanding. It's the reason he doesn't like it. And that's what you're aiming for with textual criticism, is when you can say, you can both agree on what the show's about, and then disagree about how good it is. So, it's what we like to call the reader response when you have these feelings. And you're just comparing it with yourself, first of all. But then you can take it outside of yourself. You can take it past your initial feelings. Maybe you compare it with individualized knowledge that you have. Maybe you compare it with something that happened in your life. Someone else's idea or a piece of art. So let's look first about kind of an internal or anecdotal reading. Our example here is Free. So what do you think of when you see Free? It's probably something like this, right? This reading is clearly supported by the text. We have, what's her name, Go as the self-insert character, and then if you've ever ogled a man, you are going to be able to relate to her in this thing and consume this media in this way. And yeah, Fujoshi means, right? Okay. But I was a competitive swimmer. In season 2 of Free, Rin's asked how much he wants to sacrifice for his thing. I had somebody ask me the exact same thing. How much do you want to dedicate yourself to this? It's a huge time investment. And that's really the crux of the second season. And the show supports both of these readings. It's not like my taking this as legitimate sports drama and understanding this by my individualized experiences that are unique to a swimmer are somehow different than somebody who's in it to absorb men. But what's really interesting about consuming art in this way is it forces you to acknowledge that you are, if you are like consuming the men, that's what you're doing and that's what your idea is and that's how you choose to read the show. But the question I want to ask here is how much do you think the show supports this reading? And how much of it is your perception? It's kind of this sliding scale of you see what you want to see. And multiple interpretations often are supported at once. So let's say maybe you don't have an anecdotal thing that you want to base yourself off of. Let's say you've got something a little more external to yourself. This was my problem with Sailor Moon. I didn't have the necessary context I needed to appreciate it fully. And the context that I gained from that was consuming other similar media, watching the director's other works, watching the manga, interacting with other fans, and figuring out what they liked about it. So maybe you've watched other anime, maybe you've read the manga, maybe you're familiar with the creators or the genre or, anything. And then you get stuff like this, like Mako's The Greek Chorus of Kill la Kill. I don't think this is a comprehensive reading of Kill la Kill, but it is interesting. They took the idea of a Greek chorus from, Aristotle, far back as that, and then compared it to a 2013 anime. And the thing about, and what makes these so interesting, is anime is so far from simple. It's so complicated, so much goes into it, that you do get these callbacks that, whether they're, incidental or intended, are supported by the work. So when you share this with somebody, this is a really cool interpretation. Does it tell us more about the show? But then on the same time, this guy gives a panel and it's great. It's about Kill la Kill State Shinto and the reinvention of divine imagery. And then Satsuki is Amaterasu and all the light imagery in the show. And it's completely different from the chorus. And both of these, are supported, have evidence. And they tell us a little bit more about the show. So maybe you don't have the background of like some obscure knowledge that you can compare to this. What if you're just watching the show and don't have anything really interesting to say? Well, you still do have something interesting to say. Me, being a Magical Girl fan, watches Kill la Kill, and I see, you know, the triumph of being together and compassion and understanding. And I know that, and I can share that with people who may have not thought about it in the same way. You don't always have to plaster two things together, but instead try and make sense of how the show came across to you. So say, for example, you watch Kill la Kill, and it starts out with all the boingy bits flapping all around and all that, but then you watch it all the way through and you notice you become progressively less and less aroused. And then it ends in this like platonic group hug at the end. And Satsuki's escape sequence, while even though she's naked, isn't really arousing at all. And then your feelings lead to interpretations of what's presented, and you think about why the show would include nudist speech and lines and clothes. And then you make this jump of logic, and this is your epiphany here. The show attempted to decouple sexuality from nudity. And then you've got this idea, and then you've got a reading, and then you can say something. And then you have to go back and you pull examples out, and you say, this is one area where it let me interpret it in this way. And you gather a lot of examples. And you say, Kill la Kill asks to be read this way because of X, X, and X. And then you've made a reading, and you've said something. And people, you know, don't have to agree, but you put that out there, and people will take it. And what I like to do is I like to search for the readings that are the most universal, or the readings that don't require a specific knowledge of Shinto, you know, gods or anything like that to get out of there. Because the creators are never going to assume, well, they're going to assume their audience, right? And maybe they're going to assume that you know Shinto goddesses or Greek choruses. But they know that you're going to understand sexuality. As long as you're, you know, post-pubescent, right? You're going to get this interpretation. And your sexuality could be different, or you could be, you know, offended by it and not even get that far. But yeah. So, if I would give you one piece of advice in how you're starting your textual criticism, it's to go for what's the easiest and most understood thing. The easiest and most understood thing, after you do it more and more, is kind of these broad strokes of criticism. And one of the biggest lenses that we draw from in textual criticism is those that we all have access to or widely understood as good visual storytelling. Now there's no book that you can read, there's millions of books you can read that will tell you what good visual storytelling or effective visual storytelling looks like. Those are things like subtlety and show, don't tell. We want our characters to have some emotional investment. They should be people, believable as people. Art should tell us something about the human condition. Now, those are very generalized, and they don't always have to apply to everything. But it's this accumulation of art criticism going back to the ancient Greeks. So I want to take a moment and acknowledge the Exposition Donkey. This is my least favorite thing in any anime ever. I don't know if you've ever seen Shinsai Kaiyori or From the New World, but what happens in this is that these characters are going through and they're kind of blind to what's going on in the world. Then they're out in the forest or something, and then they just stumble across literally an exposition donkey. And this donkey, just for a good 2 minutes, tells them everything about the world. And I have never in my life seen a worse example of writing than the exposition donkey. And you know, that it's fine to talk in superlatives like that, but like, that's what I'm talking about when you see other shows do exposition well, and you see a good first episode, and then you compare it with the exposition donkey, and then you realize what good exposition looks like, and it makes you invested. Let's keep going. So for anime specifically, there are a number of very important things that we all take for granted that you don't know that you take for granted until you figure them out. You expect your characters to be on model. I don't know if you know this, but you do. If they look sloppy or off, then you'll notice if it's real bad. However, that can be used against you. If you've ever seen the Utna, the revolutionary girl Utna, you'll know that there's this one thing where she surrenders something of herself, where it's this very big turning point. And then she's deliberately drawn off model in the next scene. And these is how a very smart director can pry with our assumptions and use these generic kind of everything that we know, the Dutch angle, moving the camera, tilting the camera means that you're confused or that things are wonky, things like that. And they can use them to not only manipulate you, but go further and then tell you things. Oh boy. So, what we've gone down the left side. Kind of, what did I feel? How did the show make me feel that way? And what was intended? However, if you're feeling up to it, another thing I could encourage you to try is kind of starting with an idea in mind, or watching the show holistically, not thinking about it, and then coming out of it and finding a reading beforehand, and saying, I'm going to look at, Utna based on gender equality or things like that, or, all these different types of readings. And you'll start off with something that is at least inherent in the show, that it has something to say about that. Then you'll go backwards. How did this show attempt to elicit emotions that would serve what it's trying to say? And you're using the same type of examples and everything. You're pulling out the same clips of exposition donkeys and, cattywampus cameras. And then you're ending up with, did it work? Did it get its point across? Did it tell me something, did it emotionally manipulate? So the first and easiest way is to go from emotions down to effectiveness. But if you're up for a challenge, flip it around. All right, so the last part of this panel is going to be about how to argue on the internet, because
Come on, man, let's do it!
Okay. So Sword Art Online sucks, sure, but don't go on the internet and say Sword Art Online sucks. Go on the internet and say Sword Art Online sucks, and here's why. Sword Art Online sucks by the medium of, writing standards, or, having, I don't want to talk about Sword Art Online. But look through these lenses. When you encounter somebody saying Sword Art Online sucks, what they're saying is, I don't like Sword Art Online. And if you go back to that, that requires them to know about you, or you to know about them. And that's where I like to fall back on Hitchens' razor here. And if they don't provide any support to it or anything behind it, then you don't really need to think about it too much. So you have to kind of analyze, is this person making value judgments based too heavily on their own perceptions? Are they kind of forcing a reading here that's not really supported by their evidence? The internet gives everybody a megaphone, but it doesn't mean you have to listen, or it doesn't mean you can't challenge what they're saying. And I think, as somebody who has done a whole lot of internet arguing in his past, I think that it's very important to know when to walk away, or when to, and when to walk away, and when to say this person's not offering enough here to be worth my time. Don't respond to everything on the internet. When somebody says your favorite show online sucks, instead respond to that Sword Art Online guy that we saw in the first thing.
Fuck him!
No. would respond to that guy, because he's the guy that's trying. He's trying to get there, and he wants to talk about it in a way. He's inviting you to talk about it. He just doesn't know how yet. And my final point of advice is create something instead. Instead of, just arguing about it. Like, video editing software is available, it's out there, and your YouTube videos might get flagged and taken down, might happen. But yeah, provide examples. Go through everything and say, this is exactly how, make something, or write something. If you can't, video editing takes forever, write something and say, these are my parts of support for how I'm going about thinking about this. And bounce it off other people that you trust. Find people like that. And you'll have a much better experience. And you'll honestly learn so much more about yourself than you otherwise would. So anyway, it's our Discord link. It's my YouTube channel. I've got interviews with PhDs. I've got end-of-year wrap-ups. I went through all of Disappearance, frame by frame. It's 4.5 hours if you want to watch it. Yeah. And if you guys have questions, we'll be happy to answer them for you. Or, we want to talk about anything. We're here. So, do we have a mic? Is that a mic? Yeah, just one. Yeah. Yeah, here we go. All right, yeah, if you have a question, come up to the front and the center here. We'll just, you. Check. Oh, he can walk. He can walk. Hey, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
First of all, thank you for even having something like this. It's really interesting.
Absolutely.
What I've come to notice is that 95% of criticisms I do see are anecdotal, and also that they just listen to what other people say.
Yep.
So, how would you go about breaking that?
Yeah. I agree with you. Like, yeah, that is the case, and people will fall back on those feelings really easily and their past experiences. What I would say is you're kind of treading this thin ice of asking people, well, is that just something that is individual to you? And you kind of have to get them to answer that question of like,
honestly.
Yeah, and it's a touchy subject because you don't want to tell people that their experiences are wrong, and you're not doing that, but it can come across that way. So one of the things I have really had success with is making it very much a more getting on their good side and like overdoing the nicety of it all and kind of subtly suggesting, wow, that's a crazy experience that you had. Do you think other people would have had that too? Something like that. Put that idea in their heads. It's kind of incepted in there. But yeah, that's a great question.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
If I can actually add on to that, I think Kai's answer is a great answer for trying to save the people that you're not quite getting a satisfying reaction with. But also when it's 95%, I think that can be a very exhausting number. One thing that really helped me when I went from just being on r/anime, just talking to whoever, being on the Mal forums, just whoever I find. It's finding a group of people. I mean, I'm not necessarily shilling true anime, but that's what it was for me. It's finding a group of people, a group of friends that it's not 95%, that you're like, I know this person, even though they might not agree with me on every show, this person's going to try to engage, they watch the show critically, and they took their time. So when you have a group of people like that, you kind of have your reliable base, and then when you go on Reddit, if you have a good interaction, a good conversation, that's great. Still try your best on Reddit. But then when you're trying to talk something on Reddit and you're getting all these responses you don't like, I think it's not as exhausting when you have a fallback.
It's tough on you, so be careful.
Cool, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was really excellent. I got a lot of that. So I saw this amazing interview with Gwen Stefani, and she was talking. Somebody said to her, "What is a hollaback girl?" which is mentioned in one of her songs. And she said, "I would never answer that question. That is for you to answer. This is my art, and I have my definition of it." But now, because so many people are asking so many artists so many questions, there's a ton of content that comes from artists after the creation of the art. Where do you put that content when you are doing textual criticism?
That's a good question. I think that's that death of the author thing. We're big Ikehara fans, and Hideaki Anno is famous for that. Of like, my art is whatever you want it to be, and just like, come on, dude. By saying that, I disregard the idea that there's not a hidden interpretation, or there's not something intended there. I think that if you do want to read something about it, it's, what is it, Baudrillard, the Simulacra and Simulacrum?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what that is. And it's all about how things morph from being the original text to they become something else. all entirely outside of that. So I'd highly recommend reading that. It's not too long, and you'll get the ideas.
I'm going to give us, I totally recommend him on that as well, but just to give a short answer to that, it's often recommended to me is, consider the author just another reader. They're just another interpreter of their own work.
Yeah, that's good. I totally agree. Thank you guys again. This is really fantastic content. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey?
Hi. Okay, could I ask you to go back to the Kill la Kill kind of ending photo there? Because I wanted to kind of discuss like your interpretation of this as like a form of kind of looking at something critically. So as far as like looking at this, you were saying as kind of an image of making the nudity divorced from sexuality. So I don't want to like go too much into Kill la Kill spoilers for this, but
it's already been spoiled.
So,
it's fine.
Okay, yeah, this is kind of like from the last 5 minutes of the episode, right, of the series.
Right.
So I need to point out first where Ryuko's hand is. If you can't see in the back, she has it between Satsuki's legs. And I actually wanted to say how that was intentional in the meaning of this image here. So one of the most heavily, I guess, as far as fan reactions go, one of like the worst scenes in Kill la Kill as a series, right, is the scene where Satsuki's mother, in the, you know what I'm talking about? And of course, this scene takes place right after Ryoko has defeated Satsuki's mother, and that's when she's crashing down, and there's this whole big scene, everyone catching her in his child. So the thing I want to say here is the reason Ryoko's hand is in that placement is to show the change in the importance to Satsuki of like that part of her body, how her mother had defiled it earlier in the series, and after defeating her mother, here they are laying together in victory. Wow. And so I don't think it's actually divorcing nudity from sexuality. I think this is about showing a good form of love, because obviously you know their relation. I don't want to go into more spoiler, because that's like the biggest spoiler in the series, right? Right, but this is about showing her a good kind of love in opposition to the way that her mother had treated her.
I not only really like that interpretation, I don't think it necessarily conflicts with.
I don't think it conflicts, but I think it's a much deeper than just. I don't think it's like divorcing nudity and sexuality. I think it's showing how they can be together in a positive situation.
Yeah, I like that. If you don't mind me asking, where did you come across that?
I mean, that's.
Did you?
No,
that's just, she just looked at it herself.
Oh, that's yours. That's the homegrown.
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, I read a lot about this stuff too, but I don't like go on that subreddit.
Well, no, I was just wondering if you came up with it. You noticed that in that picture, like we freeze framed that, and I don't know. Yeah.
Well, okay. That particular detail, no, there was a big thread about that, right?
Okay,
but like the meaning of it was.
Yeah, that's great. And that's kind of the value of now my idea of Kill la Kill has shifted somewhat. So thank you very much.
If I could just add something to that question, I think it's great to have different interpretations as long as it doesn't necessarily destroy the narrative in a sense, which I think yours obviously did not. But I know a lot of people's arguments when they're presenting something like that, they'll completely erase part of the story, or they'll completely not misinterpret, but kind of cover up what happened earlier. So I think that's a great way of going about interpreting, is just to make sure that it's in line with the narrative. So
do that crack reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaking about proper narrative, actually, so I've seen this word thrown around a lot, and kind of irks me a bit is that there's a deconstruction effect. I watched the YouTube video. Oh no, it's just a bunch of themes, but it's not actually what deconstruction textual criticism lit theory actually is. But yeah, that brings to me my question, which I just changed because you mentioned it. Is that to what extent should we, maybe can we and should we, two separate questions, take deconstruction as a tool to see if a narrative is undermined by its own contradictions, and is that something we should probably do in practice? Because a lot of people are just going to say, oh, well, you're wrong, and you're wrong, and you're wrong, and then resort to the author in the end resort to the tyranny of the author, right, in the end, because no one can agree on anything.
I suppose you're like asking this existential question, so is it all meaningless? Like, why bother, right? Like, yeah, I think I'm up here telling you that it is meaningful, so obviously I'm going to say it is. But yeah, I think that's, instead of looking at that as the negative, instead look at that as the positive. And say, there's so much wiggle room here, or these people are going to be we're going to have this huge discussion back and forth, and we're going to, disagree and float ideas past each other, and then, bump elbows, so to speak. But in the end of the day, maybe people's ideas aren't changed, their views aren't changed, but maybe we'll get a little bit closer to saying something interesting. And I have a bit of a meme on our server of like, let's say something interesting. Because I don't, we could talk all day about our anecdotal experiences, but that's really the meat of what you're going for. Do you guys have something about that?
I think we throw around the phrase finding common ground a lot, and that's often what you're trying to do. If someone's willing to just say you're wrong and they think that's the end of it, then it sounds like they weren't really interested in a discussion, they were more interested in kind of winning some kind of debate. If someone's really interested in a discussion, they're going to try to understand your argument, you're going to try to understand theirs, you're going to find some common ground. Eventually you'll hit a point where you can't find any more common ground, but that's fine. Hopefully you walk away with a better idea of why they think what they think, and they walk away with a better idea what you think, and maybe one of you changed your ideas. That's the best case scenario. You were convinced, they were convinced, but it's fine for there to be all these different readings. That's great. It's great that you can find whatever agrees with you the most, whatever fits your own aesthetics the most.
And, to cap it off, I think I want to go back onto that point that this tells you who you are. This is a great way of finding yourself. And I know now that I can believe in faith and hope and love because I believed it in Sailor Moon, and it affected me in Sailor Moon. And I know that about myself. And I hope that maybe through your interactions you may find it. You got 5 minutes. Let's try and get through some questions.
Thank you so much.
We actually have 15 minutes.
Oh, 15 minutes. Oh, we got 15 minutes. Whatever, you guys. Jeez.
So, considering that, narrative is part of the bedrock of every culture in human history, and...
Back to Socrates.
When are we never back to him?
Yeah, right.
But considering that narrative, not just Japanese cartoons, have changed so many hearts and minds and made people see the world in a different light. I don't want you to name any names, but do you think there are some super popular anime who have actually done more bad than good with their narrative?
More bad than good. Do you mean in terms of cultural values? Like they've promoted negative cultural values?
Cultural values, like misinforming people about the human condition. Like a show said, basically shows people behaving in a particular way when they actually don't.
Like propaganda.
After a fashion, like a really covert propaganda.
I think the first thing I want to say about that question is that cultural values themselves are relative, so it's hard to say anything is good or does damage to our ideas. I don't want to walk down that road.
I would jump in that, it sounds like you're thinking of something like A Birth of a Nation, like that type of malicious text, and I do think those would be problematic. I think everyone would agree that Nazi propaganda, Birth of a Nation, and it doesn't have to be historical, obviously there can be contemporary versions of these. To my knowledge, at least not off the top of my head, I don't think of any anime that really pushed things to that extent.
Let me jump in. Let's say something like Toloveru. Let's say some harem, campy, real dumb show. Let's say something like that. Is that making you expect to have 6 women draped all over you all the time and have them fall on you and you can see their underpants?
Doesn't usually work.
I think that's the linchpin of this discussion. Is an intelligent person going to see this as real life, and that's kind of how you fend off Birth of a Nation, right? You educate the people to know that this is racist.
Yes, and if I could make a difference, Birth of the Nation is it's not self-aware that it's racist. I guess you could argue To Love Ru is not self-aware that it's pandering and heteronormative and all of that stuff. But it seems to, at least it seems to me, To Love Ru was known, it was made known it was fan service. Birth of a Nation is not. Birth of a Nation is actually kind of, it seems to be presenting this kind of neutral, objective view, or it thinks it is, and it's actually this, horribly distorted racist view, of which of course was pretty normal at that time. But I don't think we've really pushed things to that extent.
Yeah, it's not so insidious in anime yet, or maybe it is. You should tell me. Yeah. Anyway.
I was just asking as someone who hasn't watched anime in a long time. It's just
This guy back here wants to say something about Birth of a Nation.
An example in anime would be Moharu's Divine Symbol 25. So the Japanese government made an anime film in 25 that is Western propaganda. So that means,
Yeah. It
Also,
could
what about Angel Cop?
I'm not familiar with Angel Cop.
That's a word of art.
No,
hey man, I want to stop. We could throw out examples all night, but I want to stop it at you can make art of whatever you want to make art of.
Yeah, I can talk more about Angel Cop.
I mean, you got other people to get through. But you got something left before we go?
Yeah, that's it.
That's it? Thank you so much for your question. Yeah.
There are certain times you see anime where they got, for example, you guys know Cells at Work, that new anime that's out?
Yeah.
And how there's some spin-off manga called Cells at Work Black, where they show what happens in Untitled Body, and they recently had a chapter where they were talking about.
Or you activated the subwoofers. But I want to cut you off here and say, especially doujinshi, that type of stuff. And if you're interested in the difference between, how the show can be perceived and how it can be unperceived or perceived differently, Beautiful Fighting Girl is a beautiful book that is very interesting. It talks a lot about it. Anyway, let's go to our next question. Sorry.
I wanted to ask a quick first question before I get to my second one. Do you have any text for further reading that is not everyone would recommend I'll go watch some video essays and stuff. I do that, but do you have any books or anything that you could recommend on textual criticism?
Yeah, like I said, Beautiful Fighting Girl is specifically about Japanese people like Rei Ayanami and how they're consumed, and the difference between how you can sexualize Rei Ayanami and still think she's a badass mecha pilot. How you can make that cognitive separation in your brain, and it's the coolest thing in the world. It's one of my favorite books. I know that we read and we interviewed somebody studying Ozma, database animals. That's actually a very good text, scholarly text about this from a Japanese critic. Kurt, you got something?
Does that have to be specific to just anime?
Yeah. I was actually going to say, I'm not sure exactly if you're looking more from the thematic angle, then Japanese texts are definitely great. But I mean, if you're more interested in perhaps analysis and expanding your aesthetic sensibilities, I think one of the best ways to learn about anime aesthetic is to watch a lot more film. And there's a lot more quality English critics in film than there is English critics in anime. And so if you're interested in that and extending in that direction, I think that is a great way to sort of expand your ability to analyze text, especially visually.
And I mentioned my favorite critic, film critic Hulk. It's great. Writes in all caps. It's hilarious.
Is it okay if I ask another
question? Go ahead.
Maybe this isn't super relevant to textual criticism, but I was wondering what your thoughts are with textual criticism when there's fan service in the mix. If what your opinions are on that and how that might affect it. Because for me personally, I don't like fan service, but other people, it completely does not affect them.
How much time you got?
Yeah, so it's always been really hard for me to wrap my head around.
But it is such a huge topic that goes into what are the expectations of the anime audience? We've talked a lot about it, and it's not just fan services like titties too. It can be a whole bunch of things that are fan servicey that. And I think what you run into a lot is our expectations as Westerners are pretty different from Japanese people.
Definitely.
and there's all these things you have to throw around. So like, I don't want to like brush your question off. I just want to tell you that that's probably like a great way to start thinking about stuff, you know?
I actually kind of want to charge into that question and say Baku Monogatari is one of my favorite anime.
Yeah, that's like one of the things like in my mind all the time when I watch that, and everyone is always saying like, well, the fan service is like, you know, kind of the point of it, and it's hard for me to interpret it that way and stuff, especially like with the cultural divide.
I mean, cultural divide's perhaps something, but yeah, I do not think much in Monogatari. There is some, especially if you get into Nisei and further out, where fan service is pandering. But I think for me, the big divide on fan service is you have to ask, okay, this shot seems titillating. This form of presentation is perhaps not an objective angle, but it's, you know, is this in the character's head? Is this servicing the narrative? Is this servicing the themes? And if it is, even if it's titillating, then for me, a lot of times it's okay. If it is, you know, in sort of a maximum representation of what the work's trying to do, then sometimes that's titillating, especially in a work like Monogatari where sexuality is such a core and central theme.
Or even not like that. I mean, if you're complaining about the fan service in Total Love Ru, like, what are you doing?
I mean, that's sort of the other angle, where, you know, if you're watching almost porn, then why are you upset you're getting porn? But it's, I think there's more room to criticize something like that, but if you're up the Monogatari angle, then I think that's very defensible, but you'd have to go on a more case-by-case basis to really find those answers.
So when you're looking at it and like with the difference in the cultures, you know, like how Japan is like more open with that, do you try to analyze it from their perspective, or?
Here's what I want you to do is I want you to...
I don't know that that's necessarily true.
Well, yeah, we can, you know, we can argue about that too, of the cultural differences, but here's what I want you to do is you understand that that is affecting you in some way. Take that aside and put that aside. And then as critic say, is this effective in what it's trying to do? And if you are able to detach yourself from your emotional reaction there, then I think you can look at it better, have a more even playing field. And not just for, you know, sexual or fan service is a hot button issue. Because of that, it's hard for us and cultural differences and everything. But if you're able to do that, you'll be able to look at fan service in a different way.
Thank you.
My question's super simple, you're gonna love this. When do you think the earliest acceptable time to drop an anime is? When do you think you've absorbed it? Because I've dropped the show in 60 seconds, I don't care.
No, that's a very good question, I do the same thing, yes.
Yeah.
Boy, we have argued about this one, have we not?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think 30 seconds is acceptable, but, you know, I mean, as soon as you want, really. It just kind of depends on the authority. If you drop an anime 60 seconds in, and then, you know, and then you can't really pretend like you're some sort of authority on it, right? If you finish the first episode, you might determine things like, well, the direction really didn't evoke a lot in me. It just wasn't the aesthetic I was looking for. But if you drop something 60 seconds in, you might determine it's not for you, but that's probably all you've determined.
Any reading is valid, even a 60-second one. However, it is, you have to understand that you're only using a basis of 60 seconds to say something about the show.
And more than likely, you're going to be discussing with someone who's seen the show. So they definitely have more of like a background on the show.
So. And you know, that's why it's important to have people that you trust, because if the people will say, hey, it gets good later, and then you really trust them, and they're like, oh, you'll like it, and, you know, listen to it.
I was wondering how you personally or otherwise would reconcile what a show could have been or what it wants to be with what it actually is. So like what kind of direction the writers or the animators might have wanted to go one way versus what the studio might have not wanted them to do. My most recent example is Darling in the Franxx. I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, that's actually a great review, because I genuinely love Darling in the Franxx, but I mean, I totally admit that after around episode 16 or so, it totally went downhill. I think the direction, you know, the production values, they kind of remained there. The production was a bit nicer in the first half, but I'm sure the Blu-rays will fix that. But yeah, I really liked Darling in the Franxx. I really liked where it was going. I was really excited about it. And how do you parse that? Well, for me, it's, for one, after having seen the whole show, go back and watch the scenes you really liked, and are they still effective? Do you still find them just as powerful? And, you know, a lot of times when you do that, if you didn't like the end of the show, you might go back and find maybe you were just more hyped or something, you know, but if you go back and you can still stand behind it, like I can do this with episode 2, episode 3 of Darling in the Franxx, I still find them very powerful, then then it seems like you've probably hit something that you really agreed with what the show was doing then, and something along the way kind of, something went wrong, something slowed down, it veered off course. In Darling in the Franxx case, it almost seems like it was supposed to be a 3-cour show to me, and they only had 2, and they had to condense something like 20 episodes into 8 or whatever they did.
Something like Death Note too.
Well, Death Note is, Death Note's specific in that the manga actually, they adapted half the manga in the first 24 episodes, or 25, something like that, and then they had 12 episodes to do the second half of the manga, so they literally adapted it at twice the pace in the second half.
Yeah, if I could add on to that, when I read how do you reconcile like what a show could have been with what it actually is, it is something like, yeah, there were parts of it that obviously were good, or could have been good, or they had good themes that they could have built on, and maybe did but didn't build on fully. How do you criticize the entire text while also paying like enough attention to what was
God, that's such a huge con. Like, I know you want to say something, Church, but I'm just going to say that this is such a huge topic. Of like, you're asking what did the viewer, or what was intended by this work, and did it achieve it? And that's something that you have to like. It's its own panel in itself. And
maybe not even the way it was intended, but what even the viewer wants it to be.
Right. Man, the Studio Trigger guys are here, and they're the worst examples of this. Seriously, like, holy shit.
So yeah, another like really popular example would be Evangelion, right? We have the last 2 episodes of Evangelion, and we actually know exactly what Anno wanted because he did give us the end of Evangelion. So I think actually for me personally, the end of Evangelion actually bumped my, my critic score of the original series up, because I was then fully aware of what the author, what the director had wanted. So that's definitely something that if they give what they wanted to accomplish with it, and you can go back and watch those again and say, yeah, I think even though the budget wasn't there, they were still able to convey it after the fact that he said what it was supposed to be.
You're asking execution, and that's kind of hard. It's exciting to talk about. But yeah, I know. And if you guys want to talk after the panel, like we'll be here all night.
Yeah,
absolutely. But we got 2 more questions. We can get them done by the time 9:15 rolls around.
I would be happy to have a conversation about Darling in the Franxx or whatever after this is over. Just come up later.
All right. So, where do you think the dub-sub argument falls in all of this? And here's a perfect example.
We're just arguing. We really were.
Dragon Ball Z is one of my favorite series, and nobody knows anything about Dragon Ball Z, either because they've seen the English dub, or they've only seen that when it's a sequel to Dragon Ball, or, that which goes to the context thing you were talking about earlier, too.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, most Americans have no idea who Goku is.
Right. It's a different person.
So the whole, if there's something that's actually being lost in translation, or if there's someone who hasn't, seen some of the source material behind something, then yeah, it's definitely something you should maybe pry at them about, maybe trying to check out, if that's what you're going for. But we definitely argue about sub versus dub a lot.
The text. And the sub is not necessarily the most authoritative version. The raw is, because there's still interpretation in who's making the subtitles. Now, I can tell you among our group, with the exception of Kai and a few other people, we're all pretty much adamant sub people. I watch a lot of foreign film, but that's all subtitled. They don't dub that. I don't really see the point of dubbing. I want the original voice actors. But that's the kind of preferences you're coming down to. And ultimately, with things like Dragon Ball, where they greatly changed it in the dub, you're almost just watching a different work. Obviously, very similar work. You can talk about a lot of things. They have a lot in common. But with points where they disagree, it's basically just a different work.
And don't be prejudiced. Penny and Stocking is better dub than yours. Period. It is. So.
I mean, the first one you get all the time is Cowboy Bebop, right?
Yeah, that's a great dub.
Everyone says Bebop is better, dubbed than subbed. Or maybe Fully Cooley is another one because of the fast text.
But yeah, there's still individual works treat them as such, and it's unfortunate that you can't understand the world if you don't know Japanese.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, learn Japanese.
Yeah, that's all I think you can do. Anyway, last question.
Yeah, this is just a quick comment because no one actually answered the question, why does Sal suck? My interpretation, everyone else is free to disagree obviously, but I think the problem is that you just keep adding female characters who lose agency to become foils for the main character. It becomes, yeah, everyone loses agency, it becomes a big master-slave dialectic, and it's just a work of misogyny and sexism.
Boom. We could be here all night. But yeah, for answering the question.
But thank you very much, it was really informative.
And thank you everybody for coming out tonight. You were wonderful.